The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Alex, welcome. Good to see you again.
Great seeing you, David. It's great being on. Thank you.
Now, Alex, I have to confess that when I was thinking about this show last week, I was thinking of one line of questions. And then things hit the fan. I can see by the ribbon that you're wearing, where are the colors of Ukraine, that you know exactly what I'm talking about. And while we'll probably cover both of those, the subject I was originally going to talk about, which has been the last month or so in Ottawa, of course, the thing that is, how shall I say it, on everyone's mind is the situation in the Ukraine. And I guess you have a very different perspective than or a unique perspective, perhaps, because you're both a parliamentarian and a soldier, which kind of gives you a different take on things.
Sure, David, it maybe does give me a different take, but I think all Canadians and pretty much all the free world is aligned right now with their thoughts and prayers with the Ukrainian people, and dealing with, Putin's overreach, the contradictions to the Geneva Convention, to the atrocious acts that he's currently committing against the Ukrainian people. And I think we all need to wish for a peaceful resolution as soon as possible, because otherwise, this has the potential to go sideways so easily. So we need to do everything in our power to continue to support Ukraine and promote a resolution to this confrontation and this act of war by President Putin and his Russian regime.
Indeed. I think that one of the things people may not be aware of is that the largest expatriate community of Ukrainians in the world is apparently in Canada. And the Ukrainian community has been a part of this country since, well over 100 years, and particularly out west, but in more urban areas of Ontario, there are very, very large Ukrainian communities that came from immigration.
No, absolutely, and I think we've seen some great solidarity and unity across the whole House of Commons. MPs that have those unique links and history that are from Ukrainian heritage have been speaking some very heartfelt, passionate speeches during the Take Note debate on Monday night and throughout. And it's just figuring how we can all work together collaboratively to ensure that community in Canada is well represented, but more importantly, how the whole Western world can support Ukraine. So it's heartening to see everybody come together and promote the needed actions. At the same time, it does impact our riding. There have been a number of constituents reach out that have family members or connections. There's even been former military folks in the riding reaching out, figuring out how can they go and help and serve. And I'm not promoting anybody to get actively involved that way. There's lots of ways you can support, although the Canadian Armed Forces is potentially on the process of mobilizing significant resources in order to augment our NATO borders around Ukraine, and it's a challenging situation to say the least. But any way anybody can help, there's the government has made an announcement to, I think, match dollar for donations, I believe, to the Red Cross and other organizations. So there's great ways Canadians can help get the needed aid and supplies. Food security is going to be so important going forward to the Ukrainian people, and the impacts writ large on food security around the globe due to this intervention and this action by Russia is going to hit everybody hard.
Yes, you raise a very good point there, Alex, that Ukraine is one of the breadbaskets of the world. It produces a huge number of grains, wheat, corn, all kinds of other grains that are important to our world commerce and to feed the world. I was looking at some numbers this morning, and Ukraine is certainly in the top 5 of wheat growers in the world, just like Canada. And so this will have a huge impact on that. You mentioned the difference between food security aid and military aid. And just to go down that a little bit, I think that we have to be clear that humanitarian aid is what people are being asked for. The military side, we will leave to the governments. I think that that's their job, and NATO will do that. Maybe you could just explain very briefly what NATO means and the commitment that Canada has to NATO. When we think of NATO, we kind of think of maybe something that happened in the Cold War, but it's still as viable today as it was then.
I mean, it's more vital than ever, and arguably, it was Russia's action in the Crimea in 2014 that really spearheaded a lot of actions by the West and by NATO, a lot of contingency plans put in place, the actual increased presence in places like Latvia by the Canadian Enhanced Forward Battle Groups and Enhanced Forward Presence, but not just them, in Poland, Lithuania, etc., were all plans actually, very much driven and started up by a lot of good Canadian officers. In fact, I was talking to a good former colleague of mine that just retired from the second time from the military, who was very involved standing up those plans in the 2014 timeframe. And, just in case this happened and we got to this point, and unfortunately we have with Russia's actions. And so the key thing with NATO is an attack against one is an attack against all. And that's where this is why it's such a volatile situation and so geopolitically sensitive. And Russia obviously does not want Ukraine to become a member of NATO, and maybe it's something that NATO should have considered 14 years ago in 2008 when there was the original discussions at that time, because maybe would have changed the calculus going on today with Putin. And unfortunately, those indications were there. And again, I don't have access to all the same intelligence and resources and information that I would have had when I was still in uniform a few years ago. I do express, a few concerns over the West's decisions to pull our troops out of Ukraine last week, a week and a half ago, because I think that sort of gave the signal to Putin that, all right, we're not willing to we're not that concerned about Ukraine. And again, it's tough to decide why they made that decision. I think the indications that they had available, that they knew Putin was going to go into those eastern oblasts with provinces, for those that don't understand some of the Ukrainian terminology, that they've been fighting over really for the last while and creating these sort of independent separatist split. However, I think when the West pulled out, it sort of gave Putin that signal that, hey, maybe they're not that interested, and that's why he's made this move on Kiev to basically try to install his own puppet regime, puppet government there that would be more sympathetic to him and his sort of desires and influence to control mainly energy and natural resources, because I do believe 42% of the Russian GDP is based on their export of oil and gas and other natural resources. So they're very dependent upon that, and that's some of the geopolitical sensitivities. To expand just a little bit, though, David, on the Russians' capacities and capabilities, I mean, they're overestimated and underestimated at the same time. Unfortunately, I think the next few days we'll see just how potentially atrocious things could become if Russia decides to use all their capacity and military capability. Right now, there is some prudence being shown. I think that's more at the local level from the soldiers, the Russian soldiers themselves, that see through some of the stuff that maybe would have been not as evident before the internet, before social media. They understand that, look, Ukraine never posed a real threat militarily or really even strategically to Russia, in my opinion, and the soldiers are being asked to do some pretty terrible things. And I think that's where they haven't been as willing to commit some of the atrocities and use the full military capacity that Russia has, because let's not kid ourselves. If Russia wants to take Ukraine by force, they will do it. They will pay a price. But I think they thought they could waltz right in to Kiev and sort of be welcomed. The Ukrainian people, their president, wow, there's heroism, there's courage. One of the most telling things I saw in this last week, David, was shared by Raquel Dancho, one of my conservative colleagues, who shared a picture, and I don't know her name, but of a member of parliament of the Ukrainian parliament, at a similar age, 32-year-old young woman with a Kalashnikov, an AK-47, basically being ready to fight. And that just tells you there's, when you've seen the touching scenes, that the Ukrainian people are going to fight for their freedom and their independence. And it could potentially get messy, and hopefully calmer heads will prevail. But I just don't know what Putin's going to do, and I don't think anybody knows what he's going to do. So it's the next few days are going to be telling, and we can all just stay, keep our thoughts and prayers there that some sort of resolution will come about sooner before there's even more death and destruction.
Indeed, and I think I happened to see an editorial cartoon this morning in Hill Times, of all places, where it showed Winston Churchill and his famous lines, "We will fight on the beaches," and standing next to him was the president of Ukraine saying, I need ammunition, I don't need a ride," which I think will go down certainly in contemporary history as very brave words. And we'll see where, like you say, we'll see where it plays out. There are, even as we speak, and this could change by the time this is aired, conversations going on, peace talks going on, but it always those conversations always depend on two willing partners, and we'll see how willing everyone is, particularly President Putin, and just see where things go. Now, the government has taken some pretty strong measures. In fact, I having lived long enough to see the kind of embargo pressure that nations can bring upon other nations, what we have seen in less than the last week is actually quite remarkable. It's very direct. It's very clear. It's going to hurt. And as Minister Freeland said, it's going to hurt us too, because we may have to put a notch in our belts a bit, because there may be collateral damage to our economy.
Yeah, there's going to be collateral damage across the world economies and the stock markets, and just as we already talked about earlier about food security and the impacts that will have on everything. But ultimately, it's the right thing to do. I do give the government credit. They've followed through. They've even enacted some of the recommendations we've made since the initial sanctions, and we're continuing to work together there, I think, to encourage taking every action possible that we can as a government in sync with the other Western allies to put that pressure. I think that's ultimately what a lot of Putin and his oligarchs will understand better than anything. When assets are being seized, when they no longer have access to these millions of dollars that they own and that are spread out around the globe, I think that, including in Canada, some of that will hit them, and they're not going to like that, because it's going to impact the life that they're used to living, and they'll understand that, look, their actions in Ukraine are going to have consequences elsewhere. So again, some great collaboration, some no pushback or disagreement really at all from myself or my colleagues on what the government's doing. I think there's more that they can do, and we'll continue to work with them to push on some quick decisions and quick resolutions. Now is not the time to get tied up with bureaucratic gnaws. It's time to actually act quickly because people's lives are on the line.
Before we leave this, Alex, I did want to circle back to something that you said a moment ago. You referred to a take note debate. And that's a relatively new term, is it not? I don't think I've heard that referred to before. I did see a reference that the recent debate on the Ukraine was only the second time we've had a take note debate in the House of Commons. Can you explain what that is?
Well, so no, there's lots of take note debates, David. Likely the article would have referred to maybe only the second take note debate in this parliament, i.e. since the last federal election. I participated in a take note debate last parliament on gender-based violence that was speared by stuff that was going on in Quebec. So there's really two formats for debates, sort of after hours. And that's either an emergency debate or a take note debate. I'm not procedurally an expert to explain what's the exact differences between both. But normally, an emergency debate will be granted normally within 24, 48 hours of the request because it is something pressing, and obviously this was, but I think because everybody saw it coming, it was a requested time frame that was agreed to, and that's why it was sort of ruled as a take note debate that you could take. And again, I might not even be 100% correct whether it was an emergency or take note, but my memory was it was a take note debate on Monday night. But in reality, it and an emergency debate are almost the same, and we do have them, and they have been going on. It was only the second one this parliamentary session. I can't even remember what the other one was about.
Sure. Thanks for the clarification, because that's when language is used that is not familiar. I get the emergency debate. I've heard that lots of times, but I see the parallel between that and a take note debate, which is kind of, I think that the take note term is actually a little easier, because it's saying the House is standing up and is taking note of this issue, no matter what it is. So that's a good thing to be aware of. Now, this very different world that we're into now is, of course, we had a very rapid shift from where we were, and we were a month ago in the midst of the protests in Ottawa. Now, where were you in the middle of those protests? Were you on Parliament Hill? Were you still at home? What was happening in your situation?
Well, I was here in Ottawa pretty much throughout, David. Obviously the convoy arrived in Ottawa the Friday prior to Parliament returning after the Christmas recess. So the majority of MPs from all parties were actually back to Ottawa because we were doing what we call national caucus meetings in preparation. So we just sort of finished that up. In fact, I was sitting in this office till 9 p.m. that Friday night, overlooking as the trucks were rolling in and parking in the spots that the police had designated for them to park. So I think there's a little bit of, hindsight being what it is, being 2020. I think there was mistakes made at all levels of government, in dealing with this situation, because protests are fairly frequent. They do allow parking here for other protests at times, maybe over the weekend, but obviously I don't think they were prepared for the scale. And ensuring the messaging was clear right from the get-go that, look, you're allowed to do this, but it's time limited. And, whether it was Monday morning at 6 a.m., Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., whatever the plan was, I think if they would have just provided a little bit more clarity at the local level to say, look, as of this time, we're going to start towing vehicles, we're going to start ticketing. And I think that would have done a lot more to, prevent the sort of entrenchment and moving from what every Canadian's right is a democratic right to peacefully protest, to turning into illegal blockades, et cetera. And as I'm on the record, talking to local media even before the convoy got here, look, I'll support anybody's democratic right to peaceful protest wherever they are in the political spectrum. Don't break the law. If you break the law, expect legal repercussions. And as a conservative, we're the party of law and order. You can't bend that. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. It doesn't matter who you are in Canada. It doesn't matter if it's you're just the average farmer in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, whether you're a journalist, a media personality like yourself, whether you're an MP or whether you're the Prime Minister. And, again, we've talked about in the past my frustrations with the Prime Minister where, if he thinks he's above the law, I disagree with that. And so ultimately, Anybody that wants to protest should be able to protest, but don't break the law. And in the end, the protest, the convoy, the whole turned into an illegal blockade of the roads in Ottawa. And of course, there was other things, the noise. There was a court injunction that, put an end to that after the first week, which was, not so much bothersome to somebody like myself that's already got loss of hearing due to my time in the military, but it was driving, obviously, the local residents, crazy, and we saw some stuff on social media where they very clearly expressed their dissatisfaction with the protesters. And in the end, I was just so thankful to see it finally resolved, by law enforcement. And without, all things considered, having been trained myself in crowd confrontation operations 20 some years ago in the military, maybe the last Canadian Armed Forces officer trained in it when I was a platoon commander, mortar platoon in Bosnia in 2001. And that was a secondary role of mine in Bosnia due to some of the ongoing protest challenges that were going on in that country around elections and other things. And the military got into the business then, even because it was such a politically sensitive issue to have the military trained even for overseas crowd confrontations, because that's not a military role. So, I was a little, not frustrated, but disturbed to see sort of some of the commentary in the early days of the enactment of the Emergencies Act that suggested the military was coming in, because that's not a role for the Canadian Armed Forces at all domestically to get into crowd confrontation. And so it's a complicated, chaotic role for anybody that's exercising it, but ultimately it was dealt with in a relatively nonviolent manner. You compare it to the G8, G20, 12, 15 years ago in Toronto, where there was thousands of arrests, hundreds of people in the hospital. I don't know how many investigations into law enforcement for abuse, excessive use of force, et cetera. I think there's 2 or 3 investigations onto the law enforcement side. And at the same time, for those protesters that were getting arrested, for the most part, they didn't even resist. They were, there protesting and willing to be arrested on principle, but they went as peaceful as possible. Not all of them, but my point is, I'm just very thankful that the situation was resolved without any real serious injuries or deaths or chaos ensuing that we've seen in other protests historically in Canada and obviously south of the border.
Yes, I think that's you make a very, very good point. That and I was interested to hear that you were probably you think you might have been the last officer trained in crowd control in the armed forces. I think we all have the 1970 October crisis in mind when we think of the declaration of a national emergency. But we forget a couple of things. First of all, as you say, the role of the military has changed, and the whole role of, I guess it used to be called aid to the civil power, is very circumscribed and very specific. But the other thing is that the training for police in public safety, or public order, as it's sometimes referred to, has been increased. So our police, I think, are far more well equipped to deal with demonstrations now than they were 25 years ago. So it's a different world, and with different priorities and a different response.
Yeah, without a doubt. Look, we can't really compare it to 1970 and the FLQ crisis because that was the invocation of the War Measures Act. The last time it was invoked. It was invoked for 2 world wars and for that crisis when, you got to remember, politicians were being kidnapped, even murdered. That was a national emergency. It was the former Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and his government that brought in the Emergencies Act, basically around the concerns about making sure that the Act was compliant with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that's why it was brought in. Look, my speech, I'm pretty sure you've likely watched it, David, from last Monday during the debate on the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and it's maybe even worthwhile explaining that to some of the listeners or watchers, that how it works. When the government invoked it, it was effective immediately. It got a lot of emails, people thinking that we were voting to keep it, to bring it in or to make it legal. No, it was legal and absolutely within the government's right when they invoked it. Personally, I don't think they met the threshold. I personally have not seen anything that would actually declare it a national emergency. I mean, it was a terrible situation that was going on in Ottawa at the time when they invoked it, but it wasn't a national emergency. I personally cannot buy into the fact that having 4 city blocks blockaded with protesters is a national emergency. And all the existing laws, that has been talked about at length, and I don't disagree when you have the interim chief of police of Ottawa saying after the fact that the Emergencies Act made it easier for them to do their role in the collaboration and coordination of all the different law enforcement that were agencies that were brought in to clear this. 100%. That's dirt simple. That's easy to agree to because it did remove a lot of the administration and logistics behind allowing those different agencies to serve as really uphold local Ottawa bylaws, i.e. parking infractions. It allowed them to do that a lot easier and without the normal sort of, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's that needed to be done to swear somebody in to support. So all that being said, they did it. There is now a parliamentary review committee that needs to be struck. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of politics going on there. The government doesn't even want the official opposition to chair it, which is normally any accountable or oversight committee that traditionally is set in the House of Commons is chaired by the official opposition. They're pushing back and they put a proposal on the table and it's being debated. In fact, there's likely going to they're going to move closure likely to even get that settled. But that's a separate, discussion almost on what's going on. But it'll ultimately go through and find out whether or not the justification. And I'm optimistic, or maybe I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful.
Realistic. Let's just say you're realistic.
No, I don't even know if realistic is the word. I'd like to see the ultimate decision and review being done in a more public fashion and with complete transparency and accountability. That will take a full year to go through. The Parliamentary Review Committee, from my read of the Act, has 7 days to get their 7 sitting days from the revocation that happened a week ago today to table their first report. And then after that, there's, I think, whether it's the 30 or 60 days for the next, that the government actually has to table some documentation. But then I think it'll be a full year before we see the full inquiry or whatever that's going to be looked at. But this is new ground for everybody. First time ever that the Emergencies Act has been invoked. But to go back to the justification, even if it was justified based on information that the general public and even us as MPs didn't have access to, as I laid out in my speech on the Monday, just a couple hours before the vote, and as Liberal lawyers and MPs Joel Lightbound, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith clearly laid out, and they're lawyers, they don't believe the government ever did meet the threshold to invoke the Act, and it definitely wasn't required to still be in power or in place Monday night, considering everything had been resolved by end of play on Saturday. And I think we saw that play out. The only reason, as they stated in their speeches, that they voted to keep it in place was Trudeau had called it a confidence motion and it would have triggered another federal election, which they couldn't support, being Liberal MPs. And I think the NDP were pretty much in the same vote, although different MPs had different takes during their speeches. But ultimately, the Senate, by all indications, were very split on it, and it looked like, from my understanding, that the majority of them were going to revoke it. So the government finally did the responsible thing, in my viewpoint, and revoked the Act. And now it'll be what it is. I think, even going back to the point about the protests and law enforcement, hopefully the bar hasn't been set too low here from a threshold perspective for any future government, where they can, it doesn't matter who they are, what political stripe, that they now can use this fairly low bar that's been set to declare a national emergency and invoke the most powerful piece of legislation that exists really in this country. And hopefully there is lessons clearly not only identified but learned going forward from everybody. And I think, again, that goes back to even how the protest was dealt with. To your comment, they've learned from those past mistakes and from a law enforcement standpoint, and it I think allowed for the better resolution. So lots to unpack there, David. Lots going on. There's going to be, this was not going to go away for anytime soon, and it's going to take the better part of likely a year to see the full conclusion of the fallout of this decision by the government.
And I fully expect that you and I will be having further conversations about that, Alex. Well, we've got to take a quick break, and we'll come back because there was a couple of questions I wanted to follow up on this issue with you, but we'll do that after the rent gets paid. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by OHL Action Pack. Looking to see tomorrow's stars today? Follow the teams and players you want to watch. OHL Action Pack is part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack.
My name is Matthew Rutledge. I'm a 60 scoop survivor, born in Red Lake. Was adopted from there to Toronto at the age of 4. A lot of our brothers and sisters, family members got separated from each other. That was the government's goal, to break that connection from brothers and sisters. Basically taking the Indian out of the child. Right now, they're still trying to find themselves. Originally, my birth name is Harvey Halverson. In my high school days, teens, I was trying to fit into society. I knew I was First Nations, but I didn't know who I was inside. I think later in life, I started that journey. I am proud, and it's not my man, who I am now. I love life, who I am.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, who is sitting in his office in Ottawa, just about headed to dash off to another committee meeting. So we won't keep you too long, Alex. Thank you.
No problem, David. It's always great to chat and great to get information out to the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, all your listeners and watchers.
Absolutely. Now, a couple of things about the events in Ottawa, the protest in Ottawa. One of the things that happened as part of the Emergencies Act was that bank accounts were frozen. And the problem was that while that probably scared a lot of people, scammers took advantage of people. And I noticed that your office released a news release on that we all had to be very careful. And certainly, whenever these emergencies happen, including the situation in the Ukraine, we have to be very, very cautious, don't we?
No, absolutely. I didn't put out an official news release, but I did have 4 media interviews with local media, radio, newspaper, etc., all that Tuesday morning on my way back to the riding. The beauty of hands-free in the truck, that you can do these phone calls and interviews. And it was something. I got a number of constituents reached out concerned on behalf of people that they had heard from or themselves they've been contacted. The scammers, as I'm sure everybody watching likely gets the phone calls. I normally get at least 1 or 2 either texts or phone calls to both my, personal phone, but my business phone, which isn't even listed. And it's crazy some of the calls they get in. So I normally, I'll even respond to the text sometimes is welcome to the RCMP anti-fraud line. How can I help you? And then they normally don't follow up again. But it is something where scammers jumped on this opportunity when they heard about the freezing bank accounts. And I was glad to see a lot of our local law enforcement. I know West Grey Police Services had put out stuff on their social media. There was, great media coverage to remind Canadians that regardless if they donated or not, that you just got to really, no bank's going to call you and ask for your credit card information over the phone. They have that information already. So just be prudent out there because unfortunately there are bad actors that will try to take advantage of any situation to try to rob people.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about or raise with you is as we went through the protest, I guess I was astonished at how little people seem to know about how Canada is governed. And you alluded to that earlier when you said that when the Emergencies Act or when the Ukraine crisis blew up, the government did certain things and people expressed concern over that. And you said, hey, they got the right to do that. And even the Governor General released a very short tweet saying, you know, the Governor General has no authority. There's no such thing as you are suggesting, you know, just don't.
Yeah, no, look, David, that's a great thing. I'm glad you brought that up because hopefully it'll save me getting some more emails or phone calls into my office. You know, I get them all the time. People are very frustrated with the current government and the current prime minister, and they're always asking me, well, look, I just want to make sure you know I've phoned the Governor General and registered my vote of non-confidence, and I politely say, and I'm sorry, but that's BS. There is no process. The Governor General does not have any say. There's really three ways for somebody to remove the Prime Minister. One, through the federal election, you vote them out at the ballot box. And we just had a federal election, and Canadians did elect a Liberal minority government. Secondly, the only way a non-confidence vote occurs, it's really a confidence vote. It's a motion or something that has been determined, a level of confidence, normally around money. And we have these all the time. I just referred previous in the show here about how the Prime Minister chose to make the invocation or the continued invocation of the Emergencies Act a confidence motion. Had it been defeated, we would have been into a federal election a week ago yesterday. And the third way, and it's likely the fastest way, is for Canadians that are dissatisfied, make sure and if they have friends or family or they live themselves in ridings that elected a Liberal or an NDP MP, is reach out and express your dissatisfaction with the government and the Prime Minister directly to them, because ultimately the Liberal government stays in power based on getting the support of one of the opposition parties. That's been very much so the NDP throughout since they've been the last 2.5 years since I've been elected, through two minority governments, or through their own membership. As we saw in our party, where we changed, the decision was made to replace the leader of the Conservative Party. That can happen just as easily, maybe not as easily, because the Liberals Caucus chose not to invoke the Reform Act, so they don't have the ability to remove Trudeau themselves as elected MPs. They have to do it through their membership. But ultimately, there's lots of tools that if the MPs are dissatisfied with the direction that the Prime Minister or his cabinet, i.e. his government, are going, they can express that, and they can even do it publicly, as we've seen about 4 of them now that have come out publicly disagreeing with the politicization and the stigmatization that the Prime Minister has taken around vaccines in particular. And if 4 of them are doing it publicly, I'd warn and guess there's a lot more of them behind the scenes, including a lot of those voters. So that ultimately may influence whether or not Justin Trudeau stays on as the Prime Minister more than anything. But if not, Canadians will get their opportunity at the next federal election, and that's the opportunity for them to cast their ballot and cast their vote on which party they want to see form government.
Exactly, and I think that we have to remember that we do change in Canada by the ballot box, and not the point of a gun, and not by an arbitrary action, and not by some imagined power of the Governor General. It's the ballot box. But I did want to ask you, if you mentioned reaching out to your MP or a nearby MP who might be from the governing party. How are these comments received? Is there any, you just take all the information and kind of add it up? I'm sure it can be overwhelming at times.
Well, yeah, David, that's a great one. And that's why I'm saying I always encourage any constituent, anybody that's reaching out to me, wherever they are in the country, please be respectful. I think you heard my statement I made on the 4th of February. Let's just treat each other as we expect to be treated ourselves. The pandemic's been tough on everyone. The emails that come in, and I mean, I try to reach out to anybody. I've had some pretty horrific phone calls. I'll take it all. I got thick skin. I get it. I do get very upset at anybody, I don't care who they are, that calls in and gets mad at my staff. My staff are nonpartisan. Their job is there to support the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. They are not the ones that got elected. They're there just trying to do their best to help everybody, regardless of who you are or who you voted for. So don't please take your frustrations out on them. If you're ticked at me or you're ticked at the government, just let's do it in a respectful manner. As for how you deal with it, it's been by far the first basically 2 weeks of February were the busiest 2 weeks that I've had since elected. Likely averaging 1,000 emails a day and 100 phone calls that were coming into the office. I'm still not caught up, so I'll take this opportunity for anybody that has reached out and I haven't got back to you. I'm working through it, but it's difficult when you're so overwhelmed, especially from people that have identified themselves and their constituents. There are individuals that choose to email every MP in the country or every senator. Those you just can note, but again, I trust they're not expecting a reply back from their non-MP. But I do try to reach out and at least acknowledge receipt. I will sometimes agree to disagree with you on whatever it is that the point you're bringing up, but I actually personally read everything and try to get back to everybody in a timely fashion. Sometimes I succeed very efficiently, and sometimes I fail miserably in getting back to people, just because things get buried and it's all a matter of timing and place and a little bit of luck sometimes. But I do have staff that bend over backwards to try to prioritize for those issues that are the most important. And sometimes if you do get a generic response back, in fact, that's what I think I'm going to have to do with a few of the emails that are either tied around the Emergencies Act that I still haven't got to, is hopefully I'll put a generic response out to answer most of them. And then if people aren't satisfied that I've answered all their questions within that email, they can follow up with a subsequent one. But I think most of the information we can provide. So it's tough. It does help form your opinion. As I said in my speech last week in the House of Commons, the first big thing I got inundated with was with respect to our opposition motion that we put forward at the start of the month to call on the government to put forth a plan to end all the federal mandates. And I think it was 99% support, saying make sure you vote for this. We need to come up with a plan to end the mandates based on the not testimony, but what Dr. Tam, Dr. Mover, what the medical officers of health are stating, that really a lot of the mandates have ran their course. They need to be revisited. So let's put a plan forward. That was very easy to vote for. I mean, obviously I believed in it personally. I ran in a federal election opposing the federal mandates. So it was easy enough to support that. It was our motion that we put forward, but it makes it really easy when 99% of the feedback that you get was to do that. The Emergencies Act, similarly, although to be frank and fair, there was a number of constituents that had reached out expressing that they felt it was the necessary tool. And when they reached out, when it was still ongoing, when the protest was still ongoing in Ottawa, 100%, you can understand where they were coming from. Some of them, once I actually chatted with them and explained, more of the situation and really what it meant, some of them changed their mind, some of them didn't, but that's fine. They just appreciated me sharing more information, more facts. However, again, very easy to vote to revoke it when the vast majority of the feedback I'd received from constituents. So it's my job is to try to represent the majority most of the time. Obviously, when I don't, I have to be able to defend that and be accountable to the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. I'm never afraid to do that. What I do owe everybody is to listen to them and to provide that logic or rationale for whatever I do in the House of Commons.
I think you touched on, I want to reiterate a couple of points you made, Alex. The first is to be civil. As they say in the post office in a big poster, be nice to each other. As angry as you may be, the number of F-bombs you drop in an email or a phone call is all that says is you're angry. It doesn't tell you what people's opinions are. Aside from what could be construed. But the other thing I think is another thing I wanted to raise up is make sure that if you're a constituent, identify yourself as such. Put your address on it, or if you don't feel comfortable putting the address on it, put the town you're in, or the township or municipality, because that matters, and I'm sure that helps your staff respond more quickly to these situations.
Two great recommendations, David. I mean, I'm the first one to admit I can slip into some foul language. I try not to do it publicly, and I try to know where it's acceptable or not, but it's never directed at the individual. Do not make it personal. If you feel strongly about an issue, a policy, something that's going on, feel free to constructively criticize that decision, that vote, that policy, whatever it may be. However, never make it personal. Everybody's got their right. That's part of being Canadian. It's part of having that freedom of expression and belief, and is to just respect that. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to respect it. And absolutely on the correspondence, again, I get if somebody doesn't want to give me their house number and their exact what road they're on, if you put down your town, your postal code, that's enough. Your municipality. And your phone number. And the reason I ask for the phone number, the people that give me their phone number, especially if it's a complicated thing you're asking about, that you don't want to lose the nuance of typing an email out, because you'll lose so much in that communication. You'll get a much faster response normally from me if you've included your phone number, because I will personally call people back and have that discussion so that there's a bit more back and forth and we don't get into emails. Because again, you may get that first thing if you hit me at the right time, and I'm doing it personally right then and there. And a reminder, my staff don't work weekends. I do try to track things in case there's something urgent comes in, but I can't do that all the time when I'm inundated. However, if I have a phone number and it's something that I think, holy geez, I need to talk to this individual, no matter who they are, to try to get clarity and understanding of what they do, I'll personally phone them. So it does make it so much easier, and I do prioritize, because that's my role, is to represent the constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. I do prioritize my replies to them. So if you haven't identified yourself, you got to remember I'm getting inundated with thousands of emails, literally. And if you haven't identified yourself, then you're just sort of in the queue. Whereas you're gonna move farther up the list if you're say who you are.
I think that most of us think that our MPs are. How shall I say, and don't take this the wrong way, without a soul.
Yeah.
but that's not true, because I've known many MPs and MPPs and MLAs over the years, and almost universally they are people like you and me. They put their pants on one leg at a time. They are human, and their staff is human. So a little bit of respect goes a long, long way. And so if we can keep that respect going, I think we'll be the country we really want to be eventually. We'll get to it. We're always a country in process. Anyway, I want to focus on sort of the last part of the show on what's happening within the party, because as you're, of course, in the middle of the caucus voted to remove Mr. O'Toole, and you have an interim leader, Ms. Bergen, and I've been watching that with some interest, because it seems that the shadow cabinet is changing, and the responsibilities of the MPs are changing as people get involved in the leadership. And what's that about? Why do they get moved out of the spotlight or the front bench, or some role in the party as the leadership begins to ramp up?
Well, no, great question, David, and I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on that. So anybody normally, and it's again sort of tradition, it's not like there's a hard fast rule, this is internal party stuff, not really anything to do with Parliament. But it's fair to not have somebody in the leadership team or in the shadow cabinet. Although the shadow cabinet, there's no fast rules. There's a number of the shadow cabinet members have come out endorsing a candidate already. However, for the leadership team, it traditionally has been they stay neutral, because their role really is that with an interim leader or in between in a transition period, is to support and set the conditions and try to make sure that the party is as unified as possible for whoever the new leader may be. And so therefore they stay neutral, so they're not unduly influencing the way things are being communicated. So that's why some people have stepped down, because they want to be actively involved in the leadership race, and why there's been some movements around. Obviously, The interim leader, she made some small changes, but really small changes writ large in the shadow cabinet within the party once Candace took over. And ultimately, the focus right now is to continue to hold the government to account. And again, I'll remind listeners, watchers out there, that the role of the official opposition is to criticize every piece of legislation put forward by the government. It doesn't mean we're going to vote against it, but it's to make sure it's under the proper scrutiny so it's the best legislation possible. So obviously our role is to primarily criticize anything coming out of the government to make sure it is the best legislation possible for Canadians. But then secondly, as the interim leader, Candace's role is really to keep the party and the caucus together and set the conditions so whenever the new leader is decided by the grassroots membership of the Conservative Party of Canada, that the party and the caucus is together, unified, and ready to go to fight, in the next federal election and to support the new leader, whoever he or she may be.
Yeah, I think that we remember that before Mr. Scheer was elected as party leader, Rona Ambrose was the interim party leader, and she did a marvelous job of, dare I say it, herding the kittens.
Yep, that's fair. I think that's a fair assumption.
I was quite impressed with her skills and abilities. I'm sure Ms. Morgan's got will have the same challenges that she had. But let's go a little deeper into this, because one of the things that the party does have the privilege of doing is to set the terms and the process for the election of the leader. It's not like the Canada Elections Act. It's determined obviously by the party. And has there been any word on that yet?
So yeah, the leadership election organizing committee, I think I might have that term a little bit wrong, but it's LEOC within the Conservative Party has been formed. So that's been comprised and decided. So they're going through that process right now of deciding what the rules and the terms of any of the leadership race. It's not hard and fast. It changes from leadership race to leadership race. I think it's fair to state, and it's no surprises, that I think we all think, or I think personally, that it's best that we do have a contested leadership race. I do not want to see a coronation, so that's not. I don't want to see one candidate and only one candidate in the race. I don't think that's good for the party or even for that individual that's going to become the leader. They need to be tested and challenged and make sure that the thoughts and processes that they're putting forward, work for not only all of the Conservative movement, and that is the challenge of being the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. As I've stated public, and I honestly believe it, we're the only big tent party left in Canada, where we have a lot more diverse diversity within the team, but we respect each other because of it. So that's a challenge always to lead that team and that movement. And so therefore, I think it's important to go through that contested process to not only hone your skills and understanding, but understanding, look, all right, I may personally believe this, but if I'm going to lead this national party, I got to take a step back on this issue or that idea, so that we have the best ideas going forward. And it's a great opportunity to be ready to, in preparation for whenever that next federal election is. So it's like anything, it's a challenge, but at the same time, it should be an opportunity. And so I'm optimistic that we'll go through this process. And if you wanted to place a side wager, I'd be more than willing, David, to say that the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada will be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Fortunately, I'm not a betting person, Alex, but I'll take
a copy, Dave.
I will take note of that. But I think that you make a valid point, that it is a process, and it is a different process than a federal election. There are already people who have declared. Mr. Poilievre, for one, has said, I'm in. And there are rumors, as there always will be. Mr. McKay, Mr. Charest out of Quebec. There are several others who have sort of leaning this way, leaning that way, but we don't know the date yet, and that'll be kind of the first, that and the conditions will be the first sort of big marker that everyone will be looking for. Do you expect something quickly? Do you expect it to be 6 months to allow for a party to gather itself?
Yeah, look, it's like anything. It's sort of like what's going on in the Ukraine, right? Logistics drive things. And so ultimately, that's the biggest challenge. We want to make sure, and I say we, the Conservative Party of Canada, wants to make sure every member has that opportunity to cast their ballots. So some of that is mainly done through mail-in ballots. And traditionally, although I'm assuming if the pandemic, and I'm optimistic it will allow the more traditional sort of convention delegate voting right then and there on the day of process. However, the vast majority of votes that will come in from the membership will be mail-in ballot. And so it takes time to organize that, get them mailed out, get them back in, validate, count, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the big key factor for the leadership candidates themselves. Obviously, what the threshold will be for money raised and for number of membership signatures. Those are all factors that will play. Based on what I've got from talking to colleagues of mine and what I'm hearing is that the majority of us, I think, feel from a caucus standpoint anyway, like the sooner the better to have a candidate selected. And when I say that, 6 months or less is a fair guess. I think by the end of the summer at the latest is what we're pushing for, but ultimately we're just the caucus. This is a party decision, which is separate from us. We do get a say. In fact, I think maybe the first time we've had a say where we were consulted and our feedback was provided. I think there will be a number of candidates. I'll share this, as I have had phone calls from 3 potential candidates that are running. And again, I'm not endorsing anybody at this time, but I've got, out of the 3 phone calls I've got, I would say 2 are likely going to announce for sure. Even when you say Mr. Poilievre has sort of declared, the race actually hasn't officially opened yet because those terms and conditions haven't been set. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. And very briefly, with just about 2 minutes left, I also we've talked about how people can participate in democracy, and people can participate by joining the Conservative Party. And there's a link on your webpage to do that, alexruff.ca, I believe.
Yeah, so yeah, great to point that out, David. And again, I can't do that at my office. It's not on my MP website. That's on my personal campaign website that I'm allowed to do that, or go to the Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound Conservative EDA website. That's where people can buy their membership, because you're 100% right. People are all the time saying who they voted for, et cetera. When they're talking about the leaders or the prime minister, well, that isn't how it works in our Westminster system. The only time you ever get to vote for the prime minister is if you live in their riding or if you join that party that they are running to become the leader of and you cast your ballot. So 100%, great plug, David. I'm not expecting that for you pushing people to join the Conservative Party of Canada. In fact, I'm back in the riding here next week. If I can come to your house and pick up your membership if you want. But we'll leave that. Look, I know we're running out of time. 2 quick plugs I'd like to get in, David, is obviously tax season's coming up. For those that need support, we do help coordinate with the local clinics for those that for free tax returns for those that qualify. So feel free to reach out to the office if you're in that situation, you haven't already. And finally, as well, first plug, doing this publicly and on the fly. The government just decided in the last couple of weeks not to do a Platinum Jubilee medal. I'm going to be giving out a Platinum Jubilee coin to 70 deserving constituents, more to follow, but anybody that thinks that they have somebody that's worthy of that, please stay in tune. There'll be stuff coming across my social media and out of my office on how they can nominate someone.
And with that, Alex, thank you so much. Friends, I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Hi, I'm Thomas Chase, a right wing with the Owens and Attack. Go behind the scenes with your favorite team on Attack Wrap every Tuesday on Rogers TV.
I am not a streamer. I am an entertainer that streams on Twitch. Let's get it right.
This is authenticity.
I don't think we could have imagined that